Hey, David Brewster here with another episode of Chordplay, and this is part two of the Chord Construction Frequently Asked Questions, or FAQ. And I've had, some messages and comments since the previous episode. And you do need to realize, when you're working on chords and music theory, this is the type of study, you can spend years, studying chords, chord construction, chord and scale relationships. And I guess the big thing to really remember is, and I've mentioned this in a few, lesson videos already, chords come from scales, and then arpeggios come from chords. So all of this information, whether you're studying chords or arpeggios or scales, it's all interlinked and related. Really the main thing to remember is if you make some progress in one area, then you're also making progress in other areas too. You just have to make sure you go back and relate it to scales or arpeggios or whatever you're studying. So the first thing we're going to talk about here, and this is crucial, if you don't really understand, chord identification, chord formulas, chord construction, overall, a lot of it relates back to intervals. And the study of intervals, really, honestly, it's not really that exciting, but it really does kind of help you tap into understanding the steps between notes in a scale, the steps between notes in a chord or an arpeggio. It's also very useful for ear training too. It'll help you kind of sharpen and fine tune the way you hear, intervals, whether it's an interval, in a melody or a chord or a phrase. And this is really important. So it's not really exciting, but it is very important. It's essential. You have to learn this. So what we're going to do, we're just going to break down intervals. I chose the key of E just to kind of put it in the easy key, pun intended. And we're just going to break down intervals here in the key of E, and I'm also going to use the low E string open as a drone, just to kind of help you hear, a little bit clearer as far as, what these intervals sound like. So the smallest interval you can play in music is a minor second. Alright, just think of, there's a ton of stuff right there. You can think of Phrygian, there's Metallica riffs. But that's a minor second. Think of Jaws, right? That's basically a minor second. Then you have a major second, so that would be E to F sharp. And then a minor third, E to G right there. And then E to G sharp would be a major third. And then E to A would be a perfect fourth. And then basically E to A sharp would be an augmented fourth, or also a diminished fifth, a flat five. And then basically, E to B would be a perfect fifth, or, most of you might think of that as a power chord. And then basically, E to C would be a minor sixth. And then E to C sharp would be a major sixth. And then E to D would be, a flat seven or a minor seven. And then E to D sharp would be a major seven. And then when we get to E to E, that's basically an octave. What we just did right there is we took a one octave, E chromatic scale. And then we really just kind of measured and noticed, the distance between all of those notes related to E. Right? And that's really kind of given you the nuts and bolts as far as what you can modify and change, in chords, also scales, arpeggios, melodies, and all sorts of stuff. Now that we've talked about intervals, or at least a basic, overview of intervals, let's just, target triads next. So a basic, minor triad would have the first, the flat third, and the fifth, or the root minor third and perfect fifth, and that would basically be E, G, and B right here. Okay, so those three notes right there make up that E minor triad or chord. Now if we take that G and raise that to a G sharp, or raise the minor third to a major third, then that changes it to E major. Right? Okay, now if we go back to the minor chord, the minor triad, if we also flat the fifth, and we basically play E, G, and B flat, now we're playing diminished. Now if we go back to the major triad where we had E, G sharp, and B, if we take that fifth, which is B, and raise it a half step, that's going to be a raised fifth, and we're creating augmented. And then also, we've talked about this in a few episodes, that B is unfortunately going to change into a B sharp. And I know some of you out there are like, there's no such thing. Well, there is such a thing, because in the key of E, we're raising the fifth B, and we're not raising it to a C, we're raising it to B sharp. And there's our Buckethead approved, augmented chord. So right there, that's the four, basic triads. Minor, major, diminished, and also augmented. So here's a chart to kind of help you remember, those basic triads and the way you can kind of spell those, with the chord formula beside it. Okay, so the basis of all chord construction, no matter how crazy, of a chord you're trying to create or locate, almost all chord construction will revolve around one of those four triads, minor, major, diminished, or augmented. So let's just target, major and minor. We're not going to really worry about diminished and augmented for now. Let's just keep it simple. And let's talk about sus chords, okay? Because sus chords are very, very common. They popped up in a bunch of episodes of Chordplay, Van Halen and Rat and a whole bunch of stuff. But with sus chords, there's a sus2 and a sus4, okay? Now suspended chords, which is basically what sus means, they mean suspended. They're not really major and they're not really minor, basically because we're replacing the third with either the second or the fourth. So let's just look at like a basic, E major chord right here. There's E major, and our major third is right there on the B string on the 9th fret. That's the G sharp. Now if we get rid of that G sharp and replace it with F sharp, which is right here on the 7th fret on the B string, that's the second. It's a major second in the key of E. But we're going to put that in the chord. And then now that's magically E sus2. It's not major, it's not minor, it's a suspended second chord, or sus2. Now we can also, change that E major and we can incorporate the fourth right here, which is this A note. And we're replacing G sharp with A, and that's going to create sus4. Now when you hear those chords, back to back like that, you can hear that kind of voice leading and the pull between the notes, because there's sus4 to major, and then sus2 to major. And the interesting thing about sus chords is they're neutral. There we're using it in a major key. We can also use them in a minor key, and then they almost start to sound more like minor chords. So there's, E minor, E sus2, E sus4, and then back to E minor. And it has a little different ring to it, compared to the happier, major version. So sus chords are kind of like chameleons. They adapt to whatever tonality you use it in. If you use them with a major key or a major chord, they sound bright and happy like major chords. And then if you use them with a minor chord, they sound darker. Which is interesting. They kind of mimic wherever you use them. Another really common chord type that we've hit in a few episodes already are add 9 chords. And in music terminology, chord identification, chord formulas, scale of formulas, basically the second is also known as the 9th, the 4th is also known as the 11th, and the 6th is also known as the 13th. So this is a situation where, we just located E sus2, basically. And we replaced the 3rd of that chord with the 2nd. Well, what happens if we keep the 3rd? Let's say we take this E major chord. We're going to keep that G sharp, but we also want to add an F sharp, and that would create this. And there's E add 9. Big fan of those chords. I love add 9 chords. And then you could also make a minor add 9 just by changing G sharp to G, and we're going to keep that F sharp right there. Really cool chord. All right, now we're going to move on into 7th chords, and basically we're going to take the same triads we looked at before, and then we're going to add the 7th. And this is just going to expand, the 3-note triads into 4-note, 7th chords. So in 7th chord land, there's basically 4 different types, and we're going to look at those now. So if we think of E major that we've been using here, if we add the major 7th, which is basically that D sharp right there, that's going to change that to a real jazzy, major 7th chord. If we take that, D sharp, which is the major 7th, if we change that to a minor 7th, which is D natural, then that's going to change that to an E7 chord, or E dominant 7. Think of Credence and stuff. Right? And that's, a very, very common sound. Think of blues and a lot of, dominant 7th bass music, and you'll hear that really, really frequently. Now, if we take the G sharp and change it to G natural, then that's going to change that to an E minor 7. And then if we take the 5th, which is that B, and change that to B flat, then we're going to have a minor 7 flat 5. Very jazzy, very dark, and mysterious sounding chord for sure. Here's a chart too to kind of help you remember the spelling of those 7th chords and the formulas that go with them. That's going to wrap this second installment of Chord Construction Frequently Asked Questions. And like I said earlier, this is an area of study. You could spend years studying chords and really understanding all the different types and different formulas and mutations and fingerings and voicings and all these different ways of playing these chords. So this isn't something you're going to nail in a weekend or a couple days or something. I mean, take time, like really study and absorb this material, because this is showing you the way. All the different types of chords that we've looked at in different lessons, and all the different types of chords you hear in your favorite songs are based around these basic triads and 7ths, and adding 2nds and 4ths and 6ths, which are also 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths into the mix. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with more material very soon. Thank you.